Welcome to episode 1, the pilot episode of That Shakespeare Life. This episode is brought to you by That Shakespeare Girl. That's me, Cassidy Cash. This episode, you'll hear Philippa and I discuss the Master of the Revels, and we're going to take a look inside court life during Shakespeare's time. What did it mean for Shakespeare to go to Whitehall Palace and perform a play? Have you always wanted to find out? Well, today we'll discover exactly what Shakespeare would have done.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life. I'm Cassidy Cash. This week, we have Philippa Brewell as our guest, and Philippa is the owner and founder of British History Tours, a membership group and tour company for those who love British history. A full-time writer and history expert, Philippa works to make history accessible to her members through her writing, tours, and digital guides. Her work has appeared in popular history publications, including BBC History, the Tudor Society, and Tudor Life magazine. Her latest project, which is accepting members now, is called British History Tours Membership and includes the live virtual tours, insider information, and custom guides that walk fellow historians through some of the most iconic locations from British history. Philippa, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for asking.
You mentioned on your website that you started British History Tours back in 2012, but I wanted to ask you to share kind of that story about how you started your company and what motivated you to begin your journey as a history travel writer.
Yeah, so it goes right back to when I was at university. I was actually doing a psychology degree, and I was looking for sort of like a female role model, if you like. There wasn't anybody in popular culture at the time who I particularly resonated with, and for some reason I started to look and connect with her via the places I was reading about. So I would, read the books, whatever, but then I wanted to go and travel to these places. And so that's how the travel sort of part started for me. And I also realised that, well, to understand Elizabeth in this case, I had to understand where she came from, what was the country like as she was growing up, who were her parents. And you end up going further and further back and go broader as well, all the while travelling around the country trying to really walk in the footsteps of whoever I was kind of investigating at the time. And then about 10 years later, still, having carried on doing that, decided I would, I know so much now, I really want to share this with people. Yeah. And so I began British History Tours. And that's kind of been evolving over the last 5 years now.
Well, excellent. It certainly seems to be going well and a wonderfully exciting way to study history for sure. Could you expound just a little bit on your opinion on that question of history being relevant to modern audiences? Why do you believe studying history is so relevant today?
There isn't anything that we do or anything in the way that we live today that hasn't got a history. And as time goes on, that history can be lost. I mean, we're coming up to Christmas as we speak. All the things we do around Christmas, some of those date back thousands of years, pre-Christian even, so what are we doing relates so far back that we've forgotten that everything we do has a link back to history. And some people may think this is over-egging it, but I do think that if everyone understood where they came from, they would understand that there isn't so much difference in the world, that causes the hatred and the xenophobia and all that. That would, if we really understood our history, I think maybe that wouldn't exist. That's my idealistic view, but, that's the way I see it.
Well, it's a convincing reason to me. So what about someone who doesn't think that they like history, that studying history is boring or something? Are there still some benefits to participating in a historical group or a society, even if maybe history is not your thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a problem really with thinking of history as its own discipline because of what I've just said. Really, there isn't anything that we're doing now that doesn't have history. Say you're into golf or cake decorating, whatever it is, there is a history to it. Especially if you're interested in social history, which I think everyone is. If you think about it, it's all stories, isn't it? You know, people watch films all the time. They're watching the dramas on telly, whatever it is, and it's all stories. So everyone can relate to things that have gone on in the past because it's happened to people. So I really struggle with someone saying they don't like history because I think they just need persuading. It's fine.
Exactly. You've got some examples that could change their mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Things like place names, you know, place names have reasoning behind them and history behind them, their own names, you know, so yeah, it comes into everything that everyone does. So yeah.
Well, one such example or historical place that is really interesting would be one of the recent videos you did in your membership group, which was taking a look at Queen Mary's steps, which I know I was surprised because I didn't know those were there. Can you share with us why those steps are significant?
Yeah, so that was part of a video I did for the group about Whitehall Palace. So Whitehall Palace was a major palace. It was a big, significant palace at the time of the Tudors and right through into the start of the Stuart era and beyond. But if you went to find Whitehall Palace now, you can't find it because it's gone, except places built during the reign of James I. So it's not Tudor one because that burnt down. Anyone who knows about Whitehall Palace probably who has looked at it will know that Banqueting House still exists, but there are tiny elements still that you can see that people don't know about. And one of those is Queen Mary's steps, and these would have been the steps that the Queen would have taken to the River Thames. Now they're set way back from the River Thames, so it's not only a little bit of the palace that still exists that people don't know is there, but also it shows where the river now, the course of the river has changed so much as well, because basically the Victorians built out away from there. So yeah, so it's quite different run for the river now. But yeah, so it's just nice. I like sharing things like that with people don't generally know, but I've picked up on just from doing a lot of traveling.
Exactly, and finding just these little beautiful gems of history that are important, but that you might miss if you aren't traveling about looking for them. So share with us about court life. And, you know, Queen Mary's steps are part of a pretty significant palace for Shakespeare history because we like to talk about Shakespeare's time at court and Whitehall Palace in particular. But tell us a little bit about what that meant when he would go there to the palace. What was court life? What does it mean for Shakespeare to have gone to court? What was Elizabeth's court doing?
Yeah, so Shakespeare would have been there to do his plays. He acted as well, didn't he, in his plays? So he would have been as part of entertainment. But entertainment at the time, I suppose, had two purposes. One, obviously, like to entertain, as I said. The other was there was always some kind of political message in there, you know, some moral tale or some generally tale that would please whoever the patron was. So Shakespeare would at various times had different patrons who would have been part of the nobility at the time. They would have basically bankrolled him, if you like, and the plays would be put on to please him, but also ideally, well, the monarch essentially. You know, either Queen Elizabeth I or James I, as later on, because he performed for both, and it would be about. Yeah, it would be about pleasing them really, because that's what the patron was trying to do as well. So they'd be paying Shakespeare to write his plays and have time to write his plays, but ultimately they were looking for influence at court, and so that was part of the purpose of him being there.
Would the patrons have been there for the play? Would Shakespeare have been performing for Elizabeth or for James I? Would they get direct feedback from the monarchs on the performance, or was it were they removed? The monarchs were removed somewhat from this.
No, they definitely would have seen the plays. Elizabeth I would have been present at some of Shakespeare's performances. James I enjoyed them because the monarch wouldn't go to the theatre. So if they were going to watch a play, then the play came to them. Yeah. So yeah, certainly they would have watched. And I think it's interesting, the feedback question. There was actually a position called the Office of the Revel, who would look through basically anything that was going to be performed in front of the monarch and take out bits that wouldn't be suitable, that might annoy the monarch, or that they wouldn't be pleased with. So I imagine that, yes, I imagine they would give feedback. I'm not sure that it would be direct or via somebody, but there was also steps in place to prevent anything from annoying Elizabeth or Jane.
Sort of an annoyance filter. Don't let anything that's going to aggravate me come to the stage. That's an interesting office to have. That's almost like the Hayes office that we had in the United States, our film office several years ago. They've done away with it now, but it was a censor on what could be put on film. So it sounds like that was kind of the Master of the Rebels, was kind of a censor of here's what you can present and here's what you can't.
Yeah. And literally they would go through the plays, line by line and have a look as well. So
wow.
Yeah. I mean, this is where Shakespeare can get criticised or comes into criticism for his histories. He was never going to write anything that didn't say the Tudors were brilliant. He was this is why the rich and new Ricardians aren't that keen particularly on Shakespeare, but then he was never going to write anything different than Henry VII. Henry Tudor saved England from a tyrannical king, Richard III, because of course he's performing to Henry VII's descendants. So
exactly. So he knew his business for sure. Well, okay, but they didn't hold court all in the same place. I mean, you've shared in your membership group that the banqueting hall is still there, and you can visit that. That's a tourist location. But the kings and queens of England, they didn't always hold court in the same location. So even though Shakespeare might have been there for a court appearance in 1 year, that doesn't mean that whenever Elizabeth held court, it was always there. Is that right?
No. So the court would be wherever she was, really. So it's not a physical location. The court, so she would hold court wherever she was. It could be anywhere, her houses, other people's houses, wherever she was. Yeah, it wasn't a physical location. It's where she is and who comes with her, and it's different. So different, say, from a Privy Council meeting where they would be discussing the politics of the day. Holding court would be more where people would come to try and influence the Queen, try and gain favour, try and get her ear. So does that make sense?
It does. And so the purpose really of holding court, there was the entertainment aspect, but that was maybe not, you mentioned earlier that it also held a political purpose. Was this the monarch's way of sort of feeling the pulse of the populace or of their courtiers about what the thoughts were of the day and getting feedback from them, or maybe also influencing these people? Or what was the purpose of holding court?
That's a really interesting question, because generally when you read about more easily with a wider group of people, still would have been nobility. I mean, this isn't, she's not conversing with the man on the street and caring about his opinion necessarily. It would have been, it would have still been the nobility at the time.
Okay, and listening to what they had to say about different issues of the time.
So yeah, I mean, obviously, they would be trying to influence her. So I think there's they wanted her to her to like them and listen to them, because they would have had agendas as well. Yeah, they would be bringing issues from the people that they were hearing issues from, I'm sure.
I know one question I've always wondered about Shakespeare is, we know that he pursued patrons for his work. Obviously, he was under the patronage of Elizabeth and then James, but these weren't the only people supporting Shakespeare's works. Are these court sessions where playwrights like Shakespeare would go to sort of court the favor of the nobility who had the money to support plays and playhouses?
I'm not sure how Shakespeare found his patrons, but patrons were on the lookout for artists to sponsor, if you like. I mean, it was fashionable, but it also was a way of gaining influence. I mean, what a better way to get the Queen's attention than to put on a play by your men. I mean, but you had various patrons over time. I can't find any direct evidence that Elizabeth was a patron. He was in a group called, so they were the men of the Chamberlain, I think.
Yeah, the Lord Chamberlain's men, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then it seems that when James I came to the throne, that then became known as the King's Men. Although Elizabeth certainly enjoyed his plays and saw his plays, I'm not sure she was a direct patron, but that's just from what I've been sort of looking at. But yeah, so...
That's the way I read it too. So I'm glad you came to that conclusion as well, because I was wondering about that. It seems like she was a supporter, but no, not a direct patron. But I have some questions, not directly related to Shakespeare, but before I jump into those, is there anything else from your work or projects you have going on that you want to make sure we know?
Well, if you're interested in Shakespeare and you are travelling to the UK, I do have a Following in the Footsteps guide to Shakespeare. So where you can visit these places where so it covers London, it covers Stratford upon Avon, as you'd expect. And it goes through the story of his life as well. So it reads like a little book as well if you wanted to, if you're not going to travel here. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. I really enjoyed writing that and researching that. So that's there for anyone to download off my website if they're interested in that.
That's excellent. We'll put the link to that in the show notes for this so you guys can pick that up. Studying history over the last couple of years, think about books that you've read. What would you say are the 2 or 3 titles that immediately come to mind as having had the biggest impact on you?
Okay, well, I think I'm a typical history book reader in that I have about 5 next to my bed. And I'm sure a lot of people who would recognise this scenario. So, because you get so excited by a book and you buy it and you start reading it and you get so excited by the next book. And
Me too.
But there are a couple that I suppose they've grabbed me because not only are they good, but they were readable quickly. One is by a historian called Dr. Yanina Ramirez. She does a lot of TV work over here and she's got a podcast. And she's written a book on Julian of Norwich. And that is an amazing book. I really would recommend anyone to read it because it turns on its head a lot of the idea of, Julian of Norwich was an anchorite who I didn't have a clue what anchorite was before I read the book. So basically, she was a lady who had religious visions, and she's basically, well, they were bricked up into churches and see them because they felt they had a link to God. But that's a really interesting book to read. So I've got a blog on that, actually a book review on the website if anyone wants to know a bit more about it before they bought it. Another one is by an investigative journalist called Colin Brown. I was going to say Dan Brown, then not Dan Brown. Colin Brown, if I can swear. It's called Glory and Bollocks. And the reason that I really like it, it takes 10 events out of British history that everyone thinks they know about.
Oh, wow.
And question or start to pick out the bits that are kind of assumptions that kind of get undermined when you start looking into them a bit. So in the membership last month, we did Elizabeth I, didn't we? And we talked about her Tilbury speech, this famous Tilbury speech that Elizabeth gave. And he starts to look at, well, actually the date means that she gave this speech after she already knew that the Armada had gone, the threat had gone. And anyway, so he picks out, that's just one example, but he picks out 10 different events and kind of shines a light up to them. So that's a really good book. The other one I keep dipping into that I absolutely love. It's actually a local history book. It's called Worcestershire Past and Present, and I think it's probably even a history book in its own right now because it was written quite a while ago. And it sounds like it would only be relevant to anyone living in Worcestershire, but it's not, because it starts talking about customs of the time that you would then see sort of elsewhere. But so that's been a really interesting book as well that I've enjoyed last year.
Wonderful. Well, you mentioned that one of your favorite book recommendations is debunking some assumptions. So what are some of your suggestions for individuals studying history to separate out some of the fluff especially that you can find on the internet to feel confident that they're learning real history?
Yeah. Well, we've just mentioned one example, haven't we? That, it's stated, we've read bits where it's stated Shakespeare was, Elizabeth I was a patron of Shakespeare. And we've both looked into it and found that's not true. So I would say, number one is, I think if you go off doing a history degree, you probably do have an open mind anyway, but keep an open mind. Don't assume that because really clever people before you have looked into stuff that they've got it right. People are people. I think my psychology degree helps me with the history side of it because, I look at things and I think, well, actually, if that happened to somebody, just because it happened 600 years ago and it all, you get these things, people were used to losing children, or people were used to losing, parents died earlier. And you think, well, yeah, okay, so does that really mean that they just were okay with it? Really? Losing child after child? We're still human beings, and we can't be that emotionally, in my opinion, we can't be that emotionally different 600 years on for it to be so different. And so I'd say, keep an open mind. Think about your own experiences and your own knowledge already. Bring that to the table. I'm always saying to everyone, question everything. Just have a look at it from a different angle. I mean, I love now listening to podcasts because podcasts are like really up-to-date history books all the time, where historians are talking about things and they're throwing in their opinions and putting it into a different context for us. And went to a history tour down 6 months ago, and they were talking about military leaders, and these brilliant military leaders they're talked about as having amazing foresight or whatever, and then or bravery was one I think they were talking about, and then he said but he was 20 years old, maybe he was just, it was bravado, or maybe it was just testosterone of a 20-year-old in battle, was it? Yeah, and then you think, actually, yeah, you could turn so much of these things on their head. Someone who is, I can't remember who he was talking about now, but someone who was quite an aggressive, it might have even been Hitler, but someone who was quite aggressive and unforgiving had some kind of condition where he was in pain constantly. Who's a really reasonable human being when they're in pain constantly? Maybe it wasn't Hitler, but and there's different elements. There are people in history who are known now to have been on drugs. The decisions they're making, are they down to being a personality trait? So we're always trying to put things down to, or the history books seem to try and put things down to personality traits, where it could be just day-to-day factors. One day they've got a headache, one day they're tired. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? So there's just countless ways of looking at it. So I'd say keep your mind open.
I think that's great advice. Keep an open mind and always be learning. Well, what's next for you then? What are you and your team working on that you're excited about?
Well, wow. So it's all kicking off this year. So we've so the membership's been running for about 6 months. So I really want to concentrate on growing that over the next year or so. That's just been it's been an interesting development for me. It's meant that I can talk to people directly. I'm responding to what people want to learn about, where people want to see. So that's been amazing. And also I'm starting actual physical history tours next year. So we have an Anne Boleyn tour in May, which is already sold out. I'm about to launch a Discover the Tudors tour, which is going to be a 9-day tour in September, and maybe fit another one in some point as well. So quite a bit going on, actually. I also wanted to write a book, so we'll see. I don't know if I can fit it all in.
Well, a fabulous 2018 planned for Philippa and British History Tours. Can't wait to hear about all of that as it unfolds. Thank you so much, Philippa, for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed it too. You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.